Welcome to episode 238 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. The Refuse Fascism podcast exposes and analyzes the threat we face, promotes efforts to defend people targeted by the fascists, and most essentially, challenge, mobilize, and inspire the non-fascist majority of people living in the United States to engage in determined, defiant, collective action to defeat Trump MAGA fascism. I want to thank our patrons, sustainers who make this show possible. Join our community today for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism. Thanks to those sharing the show, everyone who buys our merch to support and spread the show. See the show notes to get your sticker packs and beanies that are back. And a special thank you to those who help the algorithms that help grow our audience by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts or their listening platform of choice. They boost the show so much. So after listening to today's show, please share your thoughts to help others find this resource. In today's show, co-producer of the pod, Mark Tingelman, and I will discuss some recent developments and the action needed now. But first, we want to share important voices of conscience of refusal to Trump MAGA fascism from this past week. We are sharing them because they are righteous, and important statements, and because they demonstrate important seeds of resistance, the type of which needs to spread society-wide in the streets and in the institutions. First, listen to ex-NFL player Chris Clue, who got arrested protesting Huntington Beach MAGA library sign. He took a few steps forward towards city council and was arrested. Listen to what he said before engaging in this act of civil disobedience.
Hi, my name's Chris Cluey, 15-year HB resident. I'm here to speak out against both the plaque and the current city council. As the community made clear at the Library Commission meeting last Tuesday, everyone is in favor of a plaque to celebrate the library, but the vast majority are against including a MAGA acrostic. Okay? Unfortunately, it's clear that this council does not listen, so instead I'm going to take my time to say what MAGA has stood for these past 3 weeks. MAGA stands for trying to erase trans people from existence. MAGA stands for resegregation and racism. MAGA stands for censorship and book bans. MAGA stands for firing air traffic controllers while planes are crashing. MAGA stands for firing the people overseeing our nuclear arsenal. MAGA stands for firing military veterans and those serving them at the VA, including canceling research on veteran suicide. MAGA stands for cutting funds to education, including for disabled children. MAGA is profoundly corrupt, unmistakably anti-democracy, and most importantly, MAGA is explicitly a Nazi movement. You may have replaced a swastika with a red hat, but that is what it is. I will now engage in the time-honored American tradition of peaceful civil disobedience.
Get out.
After the action, he told the LA Times, quote, "I have the responsibility to step up and do something. That's what I also hope to see from other people who enjoy that position of privilege and power, that they take this example and say, you know what? I can do that too. I can help protect the oppressed, because it shouldn't be on the people who are being oppressed to fight by themselves," end quote. During Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's State of the State address, he delivered this stirring call to action.
There are people, some in my own party, who think that if you just give Donald Trump everything that he wants, he'll make an exception and he'll spare you some of the harm. I'll ignore the moral abdication of that position for just a second to say almost none of these people have had the experience with the president that I do. I once swallowed my pride to offer him what he values most, public praise on the Sunday news shows, in return for ventilators and N95 masks during the worst of the pandemic. We made a deal. And it turns out his promises were as broken as the BiPAP machines he sent us instead of ventilators. Going along to get along does not work. Just ask the Trump-fearing red state governors. You can boo all you want until your constituents lose these services. Those Trump red state governors are dealing with the same cuts that we are, and I won't be fooled twice. Last week, our federal courts returned a verdict rightfully condemning the once unchecked power of a former Speaker of this House. Now, if you applauded that decision like I did, then I expect you to defend and applaud those same federal courts as they check this president in his quest for unrestrained power. I've been reflecting these last 4 weeks on two important parts of my life. My work helping to build the Illinois Holocaust Museum and the 2 times that I've had the privilege of reciting the oath of office for Illinois governor. As some of you know, Skokie, Illinois once had one of the largest populations of Holocaust survivors anywhere in the world. In 1978, Nazis decided that they wanted to march there. The leaders of that march knew that the images of swastika-clad young men goose-stepping down a peaceful suburban street would terrorize the local Jewish population, so many of whom had never recovered from their time in German concentration camps. The prospect of that march sparked a legal fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was a Jewish lawyer from the ACLU who argued the case for the Nazis, contending that even the most hateful of speech was protected under the First Amendment. As an American and as a Jew, I find it difficult to resolve my feelings around that Supreme Court case. But I am grateful that the prospect of Nazis marching in their streets spurred the survivors and other Skokie residents to act. They joined together to form the Holocaust Memorial Foundation and build the first Illinois Holocaust Museum in a storefront in 1981, a small but important forerunner to the one I helped to build 30 years later here. I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly, but I know the history intimately and have spent more time than probably anyone in this room with people who survived the Holocaust. Here's what I've learned. The root that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation and looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now. A president who watches a plane go down in the Potomac and suggests without facts or findings that a diversity hire is responsible for the crash. Or the Missouri Attorney General who just sued Starbucks, arguing that consumers pay higher prices for their coffee because the baristas are too female and non-white. The authoritarian playbook is laid bare here. They point to a group of people who don't look like you and tell you to blame them for your problems. I just have one question. What comes next? After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next? All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it. I swore the following oath on Abraham Lincoln's Bible. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of governor according to the best of my ability. My oath is to the Constitution of our state and of our country. We don't have kings in America, and I don't intend to bend the knee to one. I'm not speaking up in service to my ambitions, but in deference to my obligations. If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control. Those Illinois Nazis did end up holding their march in 1978, just not in Skokie. After all the blowback from the case, they decided to march in Chicago instead. Only 20 of them showed up, but 2,000 people came to counter-protest. The Chicago Tribune reported that day that the rally sputtered to an unspectacular end after 10 minutes. It was Illinoisans who smothered those embers before they could burn into a flame. Tyranny requires your fear and your silence and your compliance. Democracy requires your courage. So gather your justice and humanity, Illinois, and do not let the tragic spirit of despair overcome us when our country needs us the most. Thank you.
On Monday, February 17th, quote-unquote President's Day, thousands took to the streets across the country to protest Trump and MAGA fascism, with people from diverse perspectives gathering en masse, including in some extremely cold, snowy, and windy conditions. We saw the real potential for the type of determined action we need to defeat this fascist regime level up. Cheers to all the groups and individuals who mobilized their community and all who came out. Refuse Fascism organized several protests across the country with the slogans, "No, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America," and "The fascist Trump regime must go." Here are some highlights from those protests. First, you'll hear from Refuse Fascism editorial board members Sansara Taylor, speaking in LA, and Andy Z, speaking in New York City, followed by a student speaking in LA. She's a student at East LA College, and Ashley, an artist, speaking at the LA rally. Have a listen.
And there is one force in this country that is powerful enough to defeat Trump MAGA fascists. It is not Congress. It is not the courts. It is not the Democratic Party or that so-called mythical, sane, patriotic Republican. No. The force that is powerful enough to defeat this fascism is the millions and millions of regular people. The people who hate everything Trump is doing and everything he stands for. What is needed to defeat Trump MAGA fascism is for these millions of people to be mobilized, to stand up and resist in the streets and in every institution throughout society, not once and giving up, but again and again, refusing to stop, growing in our numbers until we, through our political resistance, create the level of profound political crisis across this country that creates the conditions where Trump cannot govern, cannot impose his fascist program, and cannot even hang on to the reins of power.
All right,
Could we actually drive out Trump? Well, that would be an unprecedented thing to do, but this is a time to unprecedented on President's Day and to set some new precedents of driving out a regime. And it has been done in many of your lifetimes, unless there's some little kids here. Because through Arab Spring, people took to the streets all throughout the Middle East and North Africa and drove out regimes. In South Korea, they took to the streets and drove out a regime. But what did they do that we don't do in this country? They got in the streets and they stayed in the streets. They said, "Oh, I have an appointment tomorrow. I guess I can't come out." No, people said, this is the time to sacrifice. We are not bullshitting here. This is not a time for just good feelings. This is a time to experience the joy of serious resistance and sacrifice.
From high school students taking matters into their hands to make a statement, walking out to come here to City Hall. I'm making a call out today for college students to make a stance and organize now. We are not in times to be demoralized or to wait for the books to burn or waiting for professors to be fired for teaching the truth. We cannot wait for them to come for our family members. We cannot wait for them to come for our neighbors to be raided in front of us. We cannot allow Guantanamo Bay to be our generation's concentration camp.
Yeah.
Woo! We cannot sit back as fascism takes over. Our Constitution has time and time again has proven to be conditional and a privilege that can be taken away as seen fit. I am an ELEC student trying to organize a walkout, but I don't just call students who pay to be there. I call on professors, our educators. J.D. Vance in the speech referenced Nixon in his speech saying, "The professor is the enemy." We watched this as the Department of Education shut down. Where has our humanity gone when we turn a blind eye to multiple times to Trump's racism and his rant on immigrants, dehumanizing the people I share a face with, the people I share a language with, the people I share the spoiled blood with? And you know what? Our blood will ruin the blood of this country through revolution. But let's start with the youth. It's our job to take care of our own education and take it into our hands. I don't wish to wait for a fascist America. They have laid a blueprint for us in Project 2025. We are seeing as thousands of federal and veteran affairs workers are laid off, students preparing to drop out after financial aid attacks, professors uncertain of the safety of their students, of their futures, families, and security on their own campuses. The U.S. was built on the back of slaves and genocide. It is no surprise to us that this revealing of fascism, only difference is that it is much louder. Please, as a student, and most importantly, as a human being, I ask of you to organize and, in the name of humanity, talk to your professors, talk to your chancellors. And it doesn't matter if your chancellors are telling you if your school is safe. Nothing right now can build us in this fight against fascism. Schools will be touched, and we are seeing it live happening in front of us. Our sanctions are not as safe as they tell us it is. Tom Homan does not appreciate the power of knowledge. We behold to refuse his illegitimate raids. I would like to add that we can only do so much with knowledge. What don't we know at this point? And how dangerous Donald Trump has and will be. Yes. We've been knowing. Knowledge is a responsibility to fight back. That's right. Professors need to show up for us. They gave us the ammo of knowing. We now ask them to stand beside us and bear arms in the resistance. Yes. I'm not sounding the alarm that hasn't been rung. No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA!
No Trump! No KKK, no fascist USA!
No Trump!
No KKK, no fascist USA! No Trump! No KKK, no fascist USA! No Trump! No KKK, no fascist USA!
They will make it so they never have to go to the polls and vote again. That is a giant red flag and an example of fascist leadership. It's been less than a month since Inauguration Day. A lot of change and dismantling of the government has already taken place. The parallels of what is happening in the United States White House at this very moment with what happened in Nazi Germany in 1933 terrifies me, not only as a German American, but as a human being on planet Earth.
Absolutely.
Hitler completely dismantled the German government and seized totalitarian power in 53 days, creating a threat not only to Germany, but to the entire world. You might be feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by the daily flood of executive orders dismantling federal programs and laying off government employees. You might feel that so much change is happening so rapidly that it's impossible to keep up. That's intentional. The current administration wants you to feel overwhelmed, confused, and powerless. They want to distract you and cause outrage over pointless topics like changing the name of a body of water that has existed for over 500 years. As the current administration works quickly and tirelessly to dismantle democracy as we know it, we must come together to resist fascism. Time is crucial, and the current administration must be removed from power immediately. Please support our government representatives who recognize to impeach the president as quickly as possible. It is crucial that we stand strong, united together for the greater good of humanity, and never forget that our government only exists to serve us, the people.
Now, here's my conversation with Mark. Today, I'm talking with Mark. Mark is a co-producer of the Refuse Fascism podcast. He was out in the streets of New York City with me on President's Day protesting Trump and MAGA fascism. And today we're going to talk together about this past week, some of the actions of the Trump fascist regime that really are representative of the rapid moves towards consolidating fascism and the action that's needed right now from all the decent folks out there. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
I'm always glad to be here.
And disclaimer, he's always not too far away while I'm recording.
Yeah.
He's just in the same space now.
On this side of the door.
On this side of the door.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the ring light in your glasses.
Oh,
it's a little bit distracting.
I'm staring at it.
Is it distracting to you
it's
too?
Fine.
Okay,
it's fine.
cool.
Let's get
to it.
Let's get into it. We're a month in.
You're right. We are a month in. Doesn't it feel like we've always been here? This month has been like several decades. And also just yesterday, we didn't have this nightmare. Or is that just me?
No, it's true. That transition from seeing this nightmare coming and then it existing has been very back and forth mentally, emotionally. But it is almost exactly a month.
Yeah. Trump is purging the top ranks of the military. Generals, Joint Chief of Staff. If you're not paying attention, it might seem that this is just part of the other purges that we've seen, that it's no different than the purges of the so-called administrative state. Is that the case? Or is this something that's different? And if so, what's different about this?
Yes and no. Mainly no. But there is some overlap. They're doing a lot of different things with all of these cuts and purges. With the Department of Education, for example, they do want to keep it. They just want to make it radically different. They want to make it an indoctrination center. But like with US aid and a lot of the service funding elements of the government, they just want to eradicate. They're doing a lot of different things. And this is sort of within that spectrum. But there's also part of it that's very different and very unique because unlike any of those parts, the military is absolutely key to their vision of a fascist America. The military is the most essential pillar of power. If they have a law on the books, but the military doesn't follow it, then the military has the power. Like, that's how that works. And I think that that's really central to understand. And as part of that, you mentioned that they purged the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They purged the one woman who was on it. They purged a number of other generals. They also went after the legal offices of these various branches of the military. And they put out that they're looking for new top lawyers. And some people who are in the know have said, like, this is the scariest part because the only thing that can mean is that they're getting ready to issue illegal orders. And they're trying to find lawyers who will make that possible, who will make that happen. In Trump 1, we know Trump asked multiple times if he could use nuclear weapons. He said that he wanted to send the military out during the George Floyd uprising. Not only that he wanted to, but that the military stopped him from doing that. And they don't want a repeat of that by any means. And there is an aspect of this where they're cutting costs and cutting budget. But I think that the way to understand that is that if they don't have to follow laws, they can do a lot more with less. If they don't have to follow laws about deploying within the borders of this country, if they don't have to follow even just workplace safety laws for the people in the military, if they don't have to do any of that, which is their goal, and they've said as much, they want warriors, crusaders, then they can do a lot more with less. This is the most lethal force that the world has ever seen. Most lethal organized force. Millions of people are actively enlisted in the military. And their vision is to turn it from an organization that is essential to American empire, beholden to the so-called ideals of American democracy and the Constitution. They're trying to change it from that. That's in some ways reflective of the way that the country has changed over the centuries. They're trying to change it from that into a full-on crusader, holy warrior, Christian soldier organization to violently implement every part of their agenda. I think that we need to say that there are some more intractable contradictions that they're going to face here. Like, they can purge the top of it, but it is still the fact that...
Well, and they are.
And they are. They are doing that. But it is the case that I don't know if it's the majority or if it's close to the majority of people that are enlisted are people of color. Many of the people who are enlisted see the U.S. military as an honorable institution, and some of them are definitely full-on MAGA fascists, and I'm sure that they're going to try to put those people in positions of power. But that is not an easy transition within such an organization.
That's a good point.
There's big contradictions. You know, we had Brittany
Ramos de Barrios.
Yes. We had her on from...
That's About Face.
From About Face, which is like the sort of modern day Vets Against the War, talking about this in November. I think we had her on. And I think it was really insightful.
Yeah.
About some of those aspects. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about this part?
So I wanted to just pull one thing up that relates to what you were saying. You know, the general, Charles Q. Brown Jr., the ousted Joint Chiefs Chairman, when we think about what's particular about his ousting, there's the bigger message that it sends that I'm going to get to next. But I did want to talk about him in particular. You had talked about Trump wanting to invoke the Insurrection Act, wanted to quash via force the George Floyd protests, and this general, this ousted Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, General Charles Q. Brown Jr., he, at the time of the George Floyd murder and then the uprising, he had made a video statement that was quite moving and compelling, talking about what it means to be a Black person in America and what it means to be a man in particular that's Black, and what it also means to be part of the military. I don't think that it's any leap to say that his statements around this are part of why him in particular was ousted, because he had delivered a 4.5-minute speech via video about what he was thinking about regarding the tragic death of George Floyd. And I wanted to read part of it. He wrote
what he frames as the tragic death.
What he frames as the tragic death. It's an outrageous, completely predictable, all too routine murder. He had said, "I'm thinking about how full I am with emotion, not just for George Floyd, but the many African Americans that suffered the same fate as George Floyd." He went on to say, "I'm thinking about protest in my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, the equality expressed in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that I've sworn my adult life to support and defend." He then went on to speak about living in two worlds, both with their own perspectives and views. He goes on to talk about his career in the Air Force and how he was often the only African American in his squadron, or as senior officer, the only African American in the room, and the racism that he faced in his profession, even in the highest ranks of the military, and that people don't see racism as a problem because they don't experience it. And I think that you think about the way Millie was treated, and think about who Millie was, and how vilified he was for not giving that rubber stamp of approval. And here you have General Brown talking about basically the rightness
of the protests. Yeah.
And the just acknowledging the existence of white supremacy is anathema to the Trump regime. So I wanted to just pull it back a step further and talk about what we've seen this week is an escalation in Trump trying to take over the military. And right now, it is clear that that is Trump's goal, that it is to make the military, to make all the armed forces instruments of fascist rule.
Yep.
And I think that has been made very explicit in the moves that he's making. As you said, the military is the principal institution of the state, right?
Yeah.
And I think that Trump is determined to never let that reining him back in, that saying, no, you've gone too far, ever happen again. yes, he's doing it to different top to bottom, left to right, across all aspects of the government, but it means something very particular when you're doing it to the military. And what it means when you have fascism, the naked, overt state power by the executive, unhindered by law, unhindered by checks and balances, unhindered by quote unquote reasonable
Right. Adults.
The adults in the room is what I meant. And this is how fascism gets consolidated, and this is how it does it quickly. One of our listeners, Clark, had written to me after this happened, encouraging us to remember that on August 20th, 1934, a year and a half after Hitler was appointed chancellor, he decreed that all members of the armed forces would be required to take a personal oath of loyalty to him. And the oath was, quote, "I swear by God, this holy oath, that I shall render unconditional obedience to the leader of the German Reich and people, Adolf Hitler, supreme commander of the armed forces, and that as a brave soldier, I shall at all times be prepared to give my life for this oath," end quote. And then they sang the Deutschland über alles and the Nazi anthem.
Yeah.
If you wanted to react to that about what that means now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we know, I think it was John Kelly, Trump's, someone in the cabinet of Trump's first administration that, recounted Trump telling him that he wants generals like the Germans had. And Kelly was like, what does that mean? And he's like, and Trump made very explicit. He's talking about Hitler. He's talking about Hitler's generals. That's what he wants. And before we move on, the last thing I wanted to say about this is that, like, in America, the military is out of sight, out of mind, but it is actually foundational to the rule of law. Mao said political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. A lot of anti-communists are like, oh, he's bloodthirsty. But he was actually just saying this as a fact. In class society, that's how it is. That is what determines political power. And whether that political power, whether those guns are tied to the rule of law, whether they are tied to a liberating vision, whether they're tied to a constitution, a slaveholder's constitution, but a constitution nonetheless, or whether they're tied to loyalty to a fascist leader, these things matter. These are foundational questions of what society is going to be like and who has ultimate power. It's something that has been out of sight, out of mind for Americans for a long time with the stability and the parasitism of this country, but that is a deeply true statement. So there's the military. That's great. But so we wanted to move on. There's a lot of stuff that happens this week.
I just want to say that you referenced an interview that we did previously with Brittany of that, and she was talking about the need for military resistance. And I think that this right now is an urgent reminder to people within the military on the need to not comply with fascist orders and the need for really mass resistance, mass disobedience, mass refusal from the military.
From people enlisted and the people that are getting kicked out. The military provides skills. All the other things that it does, we can talk about, but the military provides skills, and including organizational skills, things that I think can be extremely valuable to opposition, to a movement, to a nonviolent opposition movement that could actually stop this. So I think we need an appeal specifically there to join us, to get involved.
And vets should be speaking out at these protests.
Yes,
people should make concerted effort to reach out to that community.
Yeah. So another thing that's happening this week, is it still happening?
I think it ended because Trump is usually the last speaker.
So CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. Yes, that is the title. But CPAC, it is the top tier fascist political event outside of the government. It's been bad for a long time, but now it's a whole different level. There's a lot that was just open and out on display. I wanted to ask you, Sam, in your reading about everything that was happening and watching, what could we learn from what was on display at CPAC? Where's the fascist energy at? Where are their sights set right now? And what are they presenting to the public?
Well, I think it presented several things, but I want to focus on the fact that this was a Nazi love fest, a love fest for all things Nazi. The celebration of uninhibited, or maybe I should say boundless cruelty for the sake of cruelty towards all oppressed people here and around the world. Gleeful. They're salivating as Tom Homan, quote unquote, border czar, is talking about getting every quote unquote illegal gang member, because in this regime's eyes, all undocumented peoples are criminal, and getting them on planes and sending them to Gitmo. And this is met with just glee. There's giddiness from largely grown-ass men going, hey, to the notion of putting human beings in cages.
A totally lawless black hole.
In a lawless black hole. And I think that that in some ways exemplifies that movement. I mean, I would also say that, not to go off on Holman and single him out without, I don't want to elevate him above the rest. They are all grotesque in their own ways. And I hate being like an energy about him. It's not an energy about him. It's an ideology about him that's gross. But there is this energy of like, I don't need to apologize to anybody. It's the daddy's back energy.
Right.
It's the daddy's back and gonna whoop your ass and give no apologies.
It's the energy that's very cringe when someone says it about like, oh, I'm going to say racist jokes. But this is much worse because he's not just saying racist jokes. He's locking human beings up and basically the point person for ethnic cleansing. So.
Yeah. And Vance also spoke. He was the straw poll winner, which show, people like to think that like Vance, because he's not charismatic or whatever, doesn't have pull or weight with the fascist base, but he really does. Part of what animates his ideology and then what these fascists gravitate toward is his, that he's dripping with misogyny and male supremacy. This is someone who praises those who think that women shouldn't have the right to vote. I bring that up to say that there's this unity that was out there. He was seen as like the person that should run in 2028 for president.
Yes, and there were many people saying that Trump should run in 2028 for president, but yes.
And what was central to Vance's speech was very similar to what he delivered in Europe and Germany, which was that all the ills of the world can be blamed on immigrants. And I think that this is straight up Nazi shit. And I think that we have to call it what it is. I don't want to let Trump off the hook either. His speech was disgusting, but in some ways unremarkable. But he lays out a foreign policy, if you can call it that, of brute force. Right. Not that American policy is like ever hugs and kisses, but that he's overtly telling you, unless there's something in it for us, you're gone.
Right. There's no like ideals, there's no loyalty to democracy or whatever, which is usually code word for loyalty to empire. There is simply give us shit and we might, help you, protect you.
His speech was full of anti-science lunacy. It was filled with hatred of all that aren't white men, white Christian men. And he was not just in his element, but he's their hero. He's their God. And that's what you saw. And, people might want to say like CPAC's diminishing influence, but it continues to be a worldwide Nazi event. And let's be real. We have Steve Bannon, who was on the stage giving Nazi salutes. You have a Mexican actor who was giving Nazi salutes. It's not just that they're doing the gesture, they're saying the words that match the gesture too. They're going after the oppressed. They're splish-splashing around in quote-unquote liberal tears. You had Javier Milei from Argentina giving a chainsaw to Elon Musk. And what does that chainsaw represent? The slashing of any social service provided by the government. The slashing of healthcare and the ability to access food and education to whatever degree that people's basic needs are met in the society, ripping that away. That's what it represents. It also represents the purging of government. And so those are
there's definitely an underplay of like, let's destroy the rainforest, the fucking world.
Exactly. No, it is a
drill.
It is it is the burn it all down symbol.
Right.
Those are just some things I haven't finished pouring through CPAC. There was these signs where Trump is presented like Caesar, and it's the third term project for Trump 2028 and beyond.
I'm pretty sure they had the J6 defendants also.
Oh yeah, he had gotten the biggest applause, Trump, when he brought up the pardoning of coup participants.
Yeah, it is really all there.
Oh, you had Stephen Miller doing his classic railing against undocumented people as well, and immigrants more broadly. Was
and
there
the
anything?
people who coddle. I don't know if they used the word coddle this time. Bannon referred to this in some remarks. I don't know if they were on stage, but they were caught on video about these liberal Jews in the United States who are not loyal to Israel. They're not loyal to the United States. All those pieces of just this, it's the immigrants and it's all these people who are justifying and helping and destroying our white America. Anyone who's denying that there is a fascist movement, that it is ascending to power, you used to have to dig for it to understand it. And now you don't. You're denying the reality right in front of your face.
Oh, also that they're turning away now that he's there. They're getting a distaste.
They're chilling out.
No way. So I wanted to turn our conversation back to an executive order that was issued this week, claiming that Trump has the final say in interpreting the law. It's a pretty direct attack on both the judiciary and the legislative branch. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and what it means.
Yeah, so the ensuring accountability for all agencies executive order Trump signed. I mean, people, they've been in this back and forth with the courts over a lot of different parts of what they're trying to do. And people have been talking about, whether they're just going to straight out defy the courts. And they have been defying court orders, to be clear. They haven't said we are defying court orders, but they've said we should, and they've just done it. And here is an executive order which by any reasonable reading of the law of the land cannot be enforced, is entirely, totally contradictory to the Constitution. But he's issued this executive order that essentially says that the president and the attorney general, as an extension of the president, has the final say in interpreting the law of the United States. It's very clearly a direct attack on the role of the judiciary. I mean, that actually is the main charge of the Supreme Court, is interpreting the law. But it's also, considering how he has been moving, considering everything, it's also a direct attack on the legislature as we can ignore any law that you issue. And issuing laws, coming up with laws, making laws is the entire role of the legislature. It sort of reminds me of sometimes when these very same people, who are so gung-ho about the death penalty, it's like when they're signing the death warrant and then that doesn't kill the person, but that starts that process. I think that this is a big part of this is the death warrant for these ideas of separation of powers and constitutional democracy for what they are. This is him signing their death warrant. And I think that is something that people can overlook because it's not necessarily having that immediate effect, but that's what it is. But I do want to make the point that I did sort of skip over the immediate impact of it. And the direct reason he's saying that he's doing it is to have complete control over all of the agencies that are within the executive branch, to get rid of any notion that the Justice Department has any independence, or other agencies that where independence is even written into their charter. No more. Zero. This is the sort of the main immediate thrust of the executive order, is to take away any idea of independence from any of the agencies or departments that do the functioning of government.
Right. The fear and obey doctrine. And that would be the Department of Justice. Mm-hmm. That would be Federal Election Commission. Mm-hmm. That would be anything that regulates finance. Really is every agency.
I think it has gone sort of under the radar for a lot of people this week with everything else going on, but it is very important. I think that he's aggregating all this power, claiming all this power. And then even beyond that, this week we've seen all these threats being issued, threats against one of the judges, not even a threat. They're trying to open an investigation into judicial malpractice, into one of the judges that's hearing one of the main cases against them. Trump directly in person from a stage threatens the governor of Maine. Homan threatened the city of Boston. Homan also threatened AOC with investigation. There have been these threats from Chris Rufo and some of the other people who aren't in government necessarily, but are very tied in against professors. So I wanted to move this away from the power that they are directly exerting, even if that is beyond what it should be. They're issuing these threats everywhere. I wanted to get your take.
First, let's actually talk about some of these threats, because they have not really been covered in the way they should. Trump addressed governors at the White House. Trump said,
the NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
there's so many parts of that threat to break down. This is the president directly threatening a governor that they will lose their funding if they don't comply.
Mm-hmm.
And don't comply with what? A
sports ban.
Transports ban. And good for Janet Mills saying, I'll see you in court. We actually do need much more of that. Mm-hmm. And let's also pay attention to the fact he says he is the law. They are the law.
And there's a ton of government. Like, this wasn't addressed specifically to state governors. These are powerful people, and there's silence in the room.
Nobody's saying, what the fuck? The fact that nobody said, and we'll be with her.
Right.
You know, like,
zero.
We'll see you in court too. That wasn't the response, I think, is noteworthy. I just think it's worth sitting with that attack for a minute and how significant that is. Mm-hmm. And if that's what they're doing, I'm going to make the comment again with one of these other threats, but if this is what they're doing to people in power,
right,
people in elected positions of power, imagine what they are working to unleash on the masses of people, in particular, but not only oppressed people. You know, if this is what they're saying to a governor who wants to block an anti-trans ban, think about what these fascists want to unleash on trans people.
Right.
You know, if this is what they're saying to a governor, what are they trying to unleash? What kind of lawless violence are they trying to unleash on people? And I just think that that's really, really important. And I think that that's part of what gets missed. I just wanted to highlight that. In terms of other threats, I did want to lift up, you mentioned Homan. And so I wanted to play that clip because it combines the threats to state governments and state officials and the threats on the people. So I just want to play that clip.
I read a story last night, the police commissioner of Boston. You said you doubled down on not helping the law enforcement officers of ICE. I'm coming to Boston. I'm bringing hell with me.
I think that it's really important that we pay attention to these threats and what is driving them, I think you asked.
Well, even with all of the power that they are seizing unlawfully, you know, in that one against Maine, he threatens to cut off all federal funding to the entire state of Maine. It's something that even in this stage, arguably, he couldn't do that. But like, what is happening? Presidents don't threaten. Like, that's not a normal thing.
No, but none of this is normal.
Right.
And so I think that we have to get people to see that whether they can or not, whether they can do it feasibly is not the point. Right. They will try. It is not just a matter of rhetoric. This is a case often of that stupid cliche saying, you know, shoot for the moon and land among the stars. They are going to go for as much as they can and test the limits and push those limits. That's what I think.
I mean, the only other thing that I've been thinking about it is they have made these specific threats. For example, the threat against AOC, and before that, against Ilhan Omar, for hosting Know Your Rights trainings. Homan is threatening Department of Justice, investigating them, saying this is blatantly illegal, which it's not. And I think that one of the things that this is doing, no Democratic politician has stood up and said, no, we are with AOC. I'm not trying to lionize AOC. What I think is fascinating is that one of their own...
Although it's right that she did them, and that's important.
Right. But like, one of their own is coming under direct, explicit attack from the federal government, from the executive branch, from the border czar. And whether they think that it's not going to be followed through on, or whether they just want to distance themselves, no Democratic politicians are taking a stand here. And I think that it's fascinating because, you know, Joe Biden pardoned people in his administration because he was taking seriously that Trump was going to go after them. Like, this is no different. They are going to go after Democratic politicians, especially people who are being like, no, this is bad, this is wrong. They're going to go after them. They may go after the whole Democratic Party. They are doing that. And the idea that, like, one of the first times that they do that, no one speaks up, it is mind-blowing.
It's an act of complicity.
And I think that's the point of the threat, is to isolate
the
people who are, the main governor, said something back. No other governors did.
Right.
It's to isolate. And I think that's...
And the silence just greases the wheels for that. And it becomes enabling. I wanted to return to there's the threats in words and there's the threats in actions. There's the threats in words with the RFK threatening camps for people with ADHD.
And depression. People on SSRIs. And also, I think, people on Ritalin.
And people's immediate go-to is he won't
right,
do that.
He
can't do that. Not what actually does that represent? Then there's the threats in action. And two I wanted to highlight is, well, I wanted to do three, actually. I want to start with Trump ending deportation protection for 500,000 Haitians. These are people who are in this country under temporary protective status. This has been ripped away from 500,000 people. DHS announced it this week, and in August, they will be subject to forced removal. That is a threat. That is a threat. I don't know if you want to talk about the conditions in Haiti of which people are in this country to begin with.
No, I mean, I think this is a little bit of a different category of threats. It's saying that they're going to just do these things. This is related to them flying immigrants not only to Gitmo, but to a jungle prison camp in Panama.
Which I want to talk about next, which is one of the other threats.
They're doing this and is clearly a threat to everyone else. The Haitian people on TPS, the government knows where they are. They are entirely documented in being here.
They've been here since 2010.
There have been multiple waves. But yeah, I mean, I think it was in 2006 that the U.S. government pulled off a coup against Aristide in Haiti, who was an immensely popular president and popularly elected, did some basic services and stuff for a population that's been just decimated for hundreds of years by imperialism and slavery and colonization. Aristide was a religious figure. He did, some basic things, and the U.S. ousted him through a coup. And ever since that, I mean, before then also, but also ever since then, the U.S. has been dominating Haiti in the most bloodthirsty way. And then on top of that, there was a massive earthquake in 2011. All that history. And now they are saying no. I mean, they've already done this to Venezuelans who are here. And it is telling people that no matter whether you followed the law, no matter whether you have checked all the boxes and never had a run-in with police, and all these insane things they demand of people, no matter that, we're just going to write you off. You're going to be illegal, and we're going to do the most heinous things to you again. That's what it's saying.
I really appreciate that. And I think that this level of dehumanization of Haitians, that eating the dogs, eating the cats, this is extremely dangerous. There's now 500,000 people living in fear of what the U.S. government will do to them and fear of what will happen to them, especially women, when they're forced back to Haiti. So this is an act of terror to all immigrants. It's an act of terror towards Haitian siblings and an act of mass terror to all immigrants and all people of color. And in the same way, I wanted to talk a little bit about Panama, also acts of terror. Very different, right? The situation, as Mark, you said, right now, I think it's up to 100 people being housed in a sweltering camp. A Iranian woman who's being held there in this detention camp in the jungle.
Yeah, none of these people are from Panama.
Right. Told the New York Times that it is, quote unquote, like a zoo with, quote unquote, fenced cages. The woman's name is Artemis. Told the New York Times, quote, "They gave us a stale piece of bread. We are sitting on the floor." The Times reported that 8 children are among the asylum seekers being held in the camp. 300 people were sent to Panama on a deportation flight earlier this week. They were locked in a hotel, and then a third of them were loaded into buses and taken to a camp near the Darien jungle. This is completely lawless. It's completely against all decency. Most importantly, they took asylum seekers' passports once they arrived in Panama. There's at least one person who attempted suicide because of the conditions. BBC has reported that 171 of the migrants were from really all over the world: India, China, Uzbekistan, Iran, Vietnam, Turkey, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka. And they agreed to be sent back to their home countries rather than be in a camp.
There's layers and layers of this. I mean, on one level, the Darien Gap, where this is one of the most treacherous parts of the migration for a lot of South American refugees and asylum seekers and migrants up through Central America to the US or to Mexico. So there's that level. Then there's the level where this has everything to do with the threats over the Panama Canal. And, supposedly, Trump has been making those threats. I think that he's very serious in trying to do them, to seize control of the Panama Canal, which that whole history is insane and fascinating too, and horrific. But supposedly Marco Rubio went down to Panama, and the Panamanian government refused to discuss the U.S. taking over the Panama Canal, but they got this concession out of it to create this, or allow this concentration camp in the middle of the jungle for people from all over the world. The immediate reality of it and the layers of it, I don't think people have really grasped just the inhumanity of it.
Yeah.
And it's something of what's to come, I think.
And if you're able to see a people as less than human, what atrocities you will accept against them. And I think that this is one of those times. A flight, I think, already went out to Costa Rica with another couple hundred asylum seekers from Central Asia and India. Costa Rica has agreed to be one of these quote unquote bridge countries. So a place where people are lawlessly held without rights.
They're clearly not subject to U.S. laws. The U.S. is running it, so they're not subject to these countries' laws.
And what are we accepting as people if we accept this to continue? And in terms of the terror that these people are facing, but the terror that it is sending to immigrants nationwide, right after people were deported and were being detained, the White House posted an ASMR video featuring the sounds of Trump's anti-immigrant cruelty operation. The jangling of chains, the clicking, the locking of the handcuffs around people's wrists, and the steps of refugees as they boarded flights, the shuffling of their feet. This is saying that for the Trump regime and their fascist movement, there is pleasure derived. There is relaxation and enjoyment from the sounds of
people being herded like cattle.
Of racist, xenophobic torture, basically, of people being rounded up, locked up, thrown out. Natasha Leonard from The Intercept put it as pleasure derived from the sounds of human bondage.
These are the exact same sounds that if you go to, I think it was the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, they're playing this in the part that talks about slavery because these are the sounds of slavery. I don't remember which Holocaust museum I was in where they had part of it being the sounds of people being loaded onto trains, of people being gassed. These are the exact same sounds. That's what they are getting off on. Some of them maybe are just like
people being loaded to concentration camps. Exactly. Exactly. And I just wanted to quote Natasha Leonard for The Intercept one more time, because she puts it in a way that, okay, they're getting pleasure and glee from this terror, and what should we get from it? And what should we do based on it? And she wrote, quote, "To me, the sound was a clarion call, the thundering of a fascist machine that demands people of conscience stand up to gum up its works, that the clink of those chains should be silenced with blockages and blockades," end quote. And I think that we need to follow that clarion call. This needs to be met with our thundering of the people in the streets, demanding that the fascist Trump regime must go in the name of humanity.
I also just want to put in there, before we move on to the next thing, which I think we're starting to get to the resistance part of this, I also want to put in there, ICE doesn't have planes. They're using either commercial planes or military planes, and those specific people, those pilots, those guards or whatever they have,
don't fly.
Just don't do it. That's the level of disruption and defiance that we need.
You lose your job? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
What kind of job is it in the first place?
Serious.
Sorry. Sorry, I know I got too shrill. Sorry, guys. I do want to move to the resistance that we need. On quote-unquote President's Day, February 17th, protests took place in dozens and dozens of cities across the country, including in some significant number for small cities. And earlier in this episode, people got to listen to some from the LA protests. They got to hear Andy Z from the editorial board say some things in New York City. But what was remarkable about these actions and what import do you think they have?
The demand that Trump be removed was out there. I saw it in New York. I saw it in pictures from all over the country. And I think that that is really important because I think that in Trump's first term, there was a ton of fuck Trump and all different kinds of jokes about Trump and this guy sucks and we got to stop what he's doing and stuff. But demanding the ouster, I think A, it's what has to happen. But B, it's a switch going off in people's heads to be we're not protesting in just another Republican administration and their policies. We are in unprecedented waters and we actually have to call for their ouster. I think that that is one thing that was really remarkable. It wasn't omnipotent, but it was big and important. I think that another aspect of this that was really important was that this happened in big cities and it also happened in a ton of smaller cities. There were dozens of protests. And while the ones in the big cities in LA and New York, they did bring out thousands. I think the fact that in some of these smaller places, I'm thinking places in North Carolina, places in Idaho, there were up to 1,000 people, or at least there were hundreds. And then in other places, there were dozens. But I think that the fact that this is per capita, these second tier cities have really been stepping up in big ways. I think that that is something that is absolutely necessary. We don't know how in a country like this, that is so big and so spread out, where resources are so unevenly developed, where political power is so unevenly distributed, we don't actually know what it looks like to have consistent millions in the streets demanding one thing. And I think that the things that have been developing in state capitals, in second-tier cities, in small towns, as well as the stuff in major cities, this is something that I think we're starting to get a look at what it might look like. I think that that's extremely important. It's been a lot of people who've never done this before, very spontaneous, and a lot of people who have very differing viewpoints on things. And I think that that is a strength. There is the seed there of things ripping apart and people destroying what we've started and letting the fascists roll right over it. But if we play this right, if we are able to unite people and people who vehemently disagree with each other about a lot of things, but we're able to unite them in action in a consistent and a growing way, that's part of the key. And I think we've seen a little bit of that and a little bit of its opposite. And I think that that's where we're at.
Yeah. And I think uniting in action, yes, and uniting around the need that nothing less than defeating this fascist regime is our goal. Nothing less than that. Nothing short of that will do. That we need to create a political situation in this country, the conditions of which result in Trump not being able to hold the reins of power any longer. That nothing less than that. And so the importance of this declaration, no, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, really gets a foothold and becomes the basis on which a very diverse, broad group of people, including J.B. Pritzker, he should sign on to that declaration. Chris Clue, is that how you say his name? Should be signing on to this declaration. This is a pledge that people from all walks of life, on all different political perspectives, religious backgrounds, and no religious backgrounds at all, can be united around. So the vision, that slogan that talks about the positive vision and very, very essentially the demand, the fascist Trump regime must go. That is a demand of which many, many people, tens of millions actually, could be one to unite around because it's what most people feel in their hearts. And that needs to be manifest in the streets nationwide. It needs to be manifest through all the institutions where people are defying, resisting, refusing. That really, to me, links to what we need to do next, very immediately.
Yeah, which there is a date for that. It is March 4th. This could be a really important moment in world history, I think. Trump is speaking to Congress, sort of making it into a State of the Union speech, sort of not. I can't really tell.
It is State of the Union.
And it's really necessary for people to be in the streets that day. People are already talking about being in the streets that day. Refuse Fascism issued a call to be in the streets that day in DC. And I wanted to ask you, Sam, to talk about why it's so necessary that this comes to pass, that people are there on this day and what to do.
When Trump speaks to Congress, he's going to be speaking to a joint session of Congress. We need to be in DC to say no in the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America. The fascist Trump regime must go. And if you're listening and you're on the East Coast, you got to make plans to come to DC, to be in DC. And if you can get on a plane and come from further distance, you should. And if not, you should contribute generously to help get people here and to put on a protest that is of the commensurate level to the danger we face, so that we are projecting to the world this declaration and this demand. On the night of March 4th, Trump is going to be going before this joint session of Congress to boast about his accomplishments. Just think about this. This is a indoor Nuremberg rally where they're applauding terrorizing immigrants. They're applauding purging the federal government. They're applauding defying court orders. They are celebrating the degree to which they've already gutted the rule of law in a little over a month. They're going to be celebrating the fact that this regime threatens any country that doesn't submit to U.S. power, and so much more. When Trump is moving to quickly consolidate power, when his regime is stomping on Congress's power and their answer to him is to invite him to speak, we need to be in the streets. It is clear that Congress will not stop this nightmare. Half of them are MAGA fascists, and the rest can't even call this fascism what it is or call people into the streets to defeat it. So it is up to the people. It is up to us to stop Trump MAGA fascism. People wondering, well, why do we need to be there? Why do we need to be there? What will the world see? All eyes are going to be on, what is this fascist leader in the most powerful country in the world at a time of climate destruction and the possibility of nuclear war? What are the people in that country doing? That is objectively the question. And is it we're going to be at home tweeting our disdain? Right. We're going to be at home doing an IG live on our feelings, going to the tiki-taki to talk about it? Or are we going to be in the streets because we know that history shows that fascist rule needs to be stopped before it becomes entrenched across government and society? I think that this is a time where we need to be saying the people in all our diversity, in our strength in numbers, we know that no matter how fascism comes to power, it is never legitimate. And we're saying no to everything that they're celebrating. We're saying no to the bigotry, the brutality. We're saying no to all of it. And we're saying we're going to get you motherfuckers out. It will matter tremendously if all the decent people come together and make clear that we know that nothing good for humanity, nothing good for life itself on this planet can happen as long as this fascist regime holds on to power. And so if we're able to declare that there is a force that is organizing for a nonviolent mass movement that is bold and powerful and relentless and determined to stop Trump and MAGA fascism in the name of humanity, that we are a force, we are real, we are growing, and we're refusing to stop until we create the kind of profound political crisis such that Trump cannot govern the country, implement his fascist program, and maintain his hold on power. So when the whole world is watching, I want to implore you to be in the nation's capital on March 4th, to be part of demanding the fascist Trump regime must go, and to bring your talents, your creativity, your skills, your friends, your congregation to be with you. And if you can do more than just attend, Refuse Fascism is calling on volunteers to help organize the protest in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, March 4th. It is a Tuesday. I want to put that out there. So if you can help organize this protest or help on the ground in D.C. throughout the protest, we know that many hands and different skills are urgently needed. So go to refusefascism.org and sign up to volunteer. Stay tuned. There will be time, location, all of that announced shortly, but sign up to volunteer in the meantime. And if you cannot be there yourself, donate generously to make this protest happen, to get those thousands of signs that need to be seen by the world, to get banners made, to have sound, to make this a launch for much further protests and mass refusal. I wanted to give folks that information and invitation and call to act. So with that, we're going to close today's episode. Thank you for listening to the Refuse Fascism podcast. Want to support the show? Spread the imperative and support the show by getting merch. See the show notes. Join our Patreon community to fuel refusal of this fascist nightmare, patreon.com/refusefascism. Or make a one-time gift to Refuse Fascism. You can give at refusefascism.org and hit that donate button, or Venmo refuse-fascism. No donation is too large or too small. So thank you for your support. And for $0, share this show with others. Rate and review on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, or comment on our socials or YouTube. It makes a difference and is so appreciated. Connect with us on social media at Refuse Fascism, including on Blue Sky, and find me on TikTok at Sam B. Goldman RF. Contribute your time and talents to Refuse Fascism. Be sure to sign up to volunteer at refusefascism.org. See the show notes. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkelman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show. So be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.